Wonder what the new Cloverfield movie's like. It goes from God Particle to untitled Cloverfield movie, and now it's called the Cloverfield Paradox. Let's check it out. Couldn't have you just given it more time to make the story better? What's going on YouTube? This is Kid Gemini with another movie review video today, and I'm going to be reviewing the Cloverfield Paradox. It is directed by first-timer Julius Ona and is produced by J.J. Abrams, who has started the Cloverfield franchise, and stars Gugu Mbath-Raw, Daniel Bruhl, Elizabeth Debicki, and David Oyelowo. It's a sci-fi movie that is set in space with quite some suspense and thrills, and this is quite a last-minute addition to the Cloverfield franchise. It's been delayed a few times. It was supposed to come out in April by Paramount, but they made this little surprise marketing strategy in which they released it during the Super Bowl immediately after the game was over. So let's check it out. For some of you that didn't know, the movie was originally called God Particle, and it had nothing to do with the Cloverfield story whatsoever. It was an original story on its own, and it basically covers a team of astronauts who are sent out into space on this little space station, and they are testing out this little particle accelerator known as the Shepard accelerator after Earth has entered a global energy crisis, and they're doing the best that they can to bring energy throughout the planet. And unfortunately, after the particle accelerator begins to get better on their last attempted try, Earth disappears from their sight, and they end up gaining into other dimensions, and strange things start happening as they fight for their survival to get back to Earth and back into their dimension, which is a really interesting story. When I heard about this movie, I originally had a lot of high hopes because not only was this going to be included in the Cloverfield franchise, but it also had a really interesting story, and I thought it would tie in directly with the very first Cloverfield movie, which was more of a found footage monster attack, and also tie in with the other independent Cloverfield movie, 10 Cloverfield Lane, which are both good movies in my opinion. The only problem was that while it had a really good story, it felt rushed in a sort of way. It's like JJ and some of the other people involved with the project really wanted to get this movie into the Cloverfield franchise as a means of creating this little Twilight Zone anthology series. And I feel like they did it too late, too soon, and it's quite a mess. But let's look at the pros of this movie first. The first thing I liked about the movie was the cinematography. It is just excellent. I love cinematography that's all clear. It feels like you're watching an Oscar award-winning movie. It feels like you're watching another J.J. Abrams movie that has a lot of great quality and a lot of great lens flares and all that flashy stuff. Here it's just, the shots of space are beautiful. The disaster and the dark lighting when you get into the city and you see the attack and all the crisis going on is so interesting. I love cinematography like that. I'm going to show you an example right here. See how even though it's super dark, it's got a bit of natural lighting, it still has focus on the actors and sets a bit of a serious tone for the movie. I love images and frames like that. It's the one thing that really draws me in the moment I watch a movie like that. The second thing that I liked about the Cloverfield Paradox was the acting. They had a pretty good cast that's well balanced of some well-known actors and some up-and-comers. For instance, Gugu Mbath-Raw plays Ava Hamilton, and she does great in her first performance as a leading role. She holds her own. She's the rookie scientist who joins a space crew after losing her family to a fire and decides that it's best for her to just take some time off of Earth. And when she gets thrown into this predicament in which Earth disappears and she's sent to another dimension with her crew, she tries to figure out what's going on in order to get back home, and just gets really perplexed by the alternate lifestyles in which her family's alive, and she knows someone from her past, a mysterious woman played by Elizabeth Debicki, who also does great as Jensen, the girl who used to be a part of their crew in another dimension, but ends up getting involved and has a little bit of a sinister intention for herself near the end. For the most part, David Oyelowo does great, even though he's not given that much material to work with in terms of development as his character as the commander of the space station. John Ortiz does great. He's a bit of a comic relief, as does Daniel Brühl, who plays the German physicist, and it's just a pretty good cast. I mean, there's not a lot of development involved, but they are given enough solid work that they do the best they can to make their characters interesting. The third thing that I liked about the Cloverfield paradox was the alternate reality game campaigning. For instance, there were a lot of videos on YouTube that covered this Cloverfield story by the time Paramount announced its release date change from February to April of this year, in which they released a few videos, pretty much static and garbly, in which a really important character in the movie, Mark Stambler, talks about the Cloverfield Energy Initiative and warns people how dangerous it is. And it leaves a bit of clues for us, the audience, to figure out what the main story behind Cloverfield Paradox was and what we could be facing in the future. So the alternate reality game campaigning was pretty interesting. And how they kept us under wraps was also interesting. They did the same thing with 10 Cloverfield Lane, in which J.J. Abrams didn't get involved with 10 Cloverfield Lane until a few years later, when they decided, the story of being under a bunker is interesting. Maybe let's add a little bit of a twist to it. Let's say aliens invade the bunker as soon as that character escapes. And for the most part, the marketing was pretty good. They kept it under wraps, and although there were news sources of Paramount making a deal with Netflix to release this movie and possibly Annihilation through streaming, they did a pretty good job keeping this a secret, although it was really last minute. What I didn't like about the Cloverfield paradox for the most significant part was there just wasn't enough suspense or horror in the movie. It showed a little promise with Earth disappearing before their eyes, but then after weird circumstances started happening, such as the Russian with his eyeballs and insanity getting the best of him, and Mundy, an Irish character, losing his arm and just not getting overly freaked out about it, I just couldn't take the film quite seriously after that. It kept me hooked to a certain extent, but after a while it just, no tension at all, no suspense, there wasn't a lot of high stakes, it just felt like it that way. It felt like the movie wasn't really taking itself seriously in terms of being a space survival movie. If you want to know what I'm talking about when I say suspense and tension in a space survival movie, check out a movie like Alien. It's a classic movie in which the space crew discover a distress signal from an unknown planet, and then one of their own decides to go out stumbling and comes across a large nest of eggs and then gets attacked by an alien that ends up putting an alien inside of him. The alien bursts out of his chest, and then the crew gets killed off one by one by the monstrous xenomorph, and they decide to figure out how to escape the ship and how to deal with the alien. And then it's just, there's so much tension in that movie that you not only care for the characters, but then you realize that the threat is much graver than it is. But with the Cloverfield paradox, despite the particle accelerator being used on Earth to get rid of all the energy crises, only for it to disappear before their eyes and fall into another dimension, is interesting, but for the most part, there just wasn't enough suspense. We didn't get a chance to see all the effects the other dimensions had on the characters. For instance, we did see a bit of the Russian Volkov going a little crazy, his strange eye movement, and hearing voices in his head as he tries to kill Tam and Daniel Brühl's character. And also with someone like Jensen, who mysteriously appears on the ship and claims to have known the crew from many other dimensions. That's the kind of tension that was presented in the movie. It was really mild. It wasn't as heart-beating and very intensifying. So for the most part, the suspense really sucks. The second part that I didn't like about the movie was that there wasn't enough character development for each. We did get to see some development with Mbath-Raw's character Hamilton, but we didn't get to see much of the physicist, we didn't get to see much of Acosta, we didn't get to see much of the commander, we didn't get to see much of the Russian, Volkov, we didn't get to see much of Tam, we didn't get to see too much of Jensen. If they actually took the time to develop their characters a little bit more, then it would have made a fine movie and we would have really cared about the characters from there, but the only character I really cared for in this movie was Hamilton, because she had an interesting backstory, and her journey from being a mother who lost her kids to being this little heroine in the space station was just really interesting to me. The writing and dialogue for the most part was pretty cheesy. For instance, the interaction between the Russian and the German physicist in the beginning was just kind of awkward. When the Russian emphasizes the importance of having to use the particle accelerator to save the world to prevent their countries from going into war, it just kind of came off strange. For instance, the Russian says something like, must use the particle accelerator to prevent the energy crisis. We must not let the countries go to war. Oh, you can't do that at the Russian. You have to do something much better. Don't talk to me like you're my mother. There's just the writing, the dialogue was just really strange. I just thought I'd bring that up. Even when Chris O'Dowd's character Mundy, the Irishman, and the crew, just lost my fucking arm. Wow, what is my arm saying? The movie fell down real quickly after that. What I felt mixed about the movie was that it was released too early, too soon on Netflix. And I understand that while they're doing it as a means of trying to promote a new way of marketing movies to come out as a surprise for the millennials and typical old moviegoers, they just rushed it too quickly. If they only waited until April to put more time on building up on the story, building up on the characters, building up on the circumstances and the suspense, then it would have been a much more interesting movie. But with the release of Netflix during the Super Bowl after the game was over, I just felt a bit iffy about that. Another thing that I really felt mixed about, and this is toward the end, which is a really massive spoiler, they show the Cloverfield monster, but the CGI on that monster looks strange. It's not like the original Cloverfield monster right here, where it was really well developed with the size, with the intimidation factor. Just look at how well it is. They actually took the time to construct the monster well, with JJ putting out God Particle early and putting the monster in the end for almost 5 seconds more or less. It made it look like an animation from a PlayStation 1 video game. You guys could have done a lot better than that. Just saying. And while it is interesting that we do get to see the Cloverfield monster in the end, it's just the visuals weren't that good on him. The Cloverfield paradox could have been so much better in many ways if the people behind the movie actually took the time to work on the visuals, work on the characters, the story, as I reiterated, and actually thought much more about how this could have been included in the Cloverfield franchise. And I'll leave that for another video in the future. I'm going to have to give the Cloverfield paradox a C-. I mean, while I enjoyed the concept of the story, just didn't feel like a Cloverfield movie like the very first original movie did, and it didn't feel much like a Cloverfield movie like 10 Cloverfield Lane did with the connections to Tara Guto. It might have had a few references there and then, but then again, if they just added more time to the movie, then we would have had something better. Post the comments down below, tell me what you think of the Cloverfield paradox, if you liked it, if you hated it, if you think that maybe they could have done the movie better, if it was already better in its own terms, in your opinion. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, and as always, subscribe for more content. This is Kid Gemini signing off. To 1,000 subscribers. Woo!